We'll make little tiny promises. I'll call you. And we never do. I'm going to finish this project by next week. My wife's still waiting on that. Or that great promise. I'm sending the check out today. Or how about spiritual promises? How about promises that we make before? I'll pray for you about that. I think sometimes we make promises, we don't even think about it. Here's something that I firmly believe. I believe you're talking about praying for somebody. If everybody who says they were praying for somebody actually did, this world would be a whole lot different place.
Amen.
If everybody who said they were praying about something actually prayed, we'd see significant change in the world around us. So because we haven't seen significant change, my guess is there's a lot of folks who make promises but have never kept it. Making promises is easy, but keeping them, that's a different story. Throughout this month, we've been talking about our relationships with one another. And we've set some pretty heavy goals in that relationship. And because the main goal we've set is we want to honor God in the relationships that we have with each other. We want to honor God in how we have that relationship. We want to glorify Him. So through that, we've realized that there's a lot of things that has to happen. We have to be real in our relationships. No more fake relationships. We have to be authentic. So we've called this month Authentic Relationships. And we started the month saying that in our relationships with one another, we're to be selfless, not selfish. It's not about what I want. It's not about glorifying me or making me look better or what's better for me. Our relationships are to be so that I look good. Well, we're to be selfless in those relationships. And then we hit a hard one. We realize that we're to forgive. In our relationships with one another, we have to be willing to forgive others. And we have to be willing to ask for forgiveness ourselves. Last week we talked about loyalty. And how we're to be loyal to our friends and in those relationships. Our loyalty is important. But all of these things honor God. Whether it's forgiveness or loyalty or selflessness, all of those honor God. But they don't stand for a whole lot if we're making promises that we're not keeping. So if we're going to be authentic in our relationships, we need to learn how to keep our promises. We need to learn how to say what we mean and mean what we say. We need to learn how to be truthful. So this morning, in that authentic, God-honoring relationship, I want us to look at how to be truthful in our relationship. So to do that, we're going to look at an Old Testament story. And we're going to see how David was truthful. Now, as we go back into the story, we know a lot about David. I'm almost going to guess, that even if this is the first time you've ever been in church in your life, you've heard at some point something about David from the Bible. Maybe you're familiar with the story of David and Goliath. And how, by faith, he let God fight the battle and he conquered the giant Goliath of Gath. Or maybe the story you know about David is that affair that he had with Bathsheba. And you say, well, I've heard some things about David, but it's not. But we're kind of familiar with David. Maybe you know a little bit more about David from the Bible, and you know that David was anointed by Samuel to be king of Israel. Long before he ever became, he was anointed when they already had another king. Maybe you know that other king's name was Saul. And Saul, he kind of liked David for a while, and especially when he killed the giant. When he played the harp to soothe him. But after a while, Saul got very jealous of David. Because he also knew that God had anointed him to be the king. So Saul tried to kill him. And maybe you think of David, you remember that part of the story. How for several years of David's life, he was running for his life. But as we come into chapter 9, David's now king. He's king over all the land. Saul's dead, so his enemy is gone. And now he's king, and all the people, or most of the people, are accepting him as king. Whether they're from the northern tribes or southern tribes, no matter who, they're accepting that, hey, we want David. David is our king. So they're accepting of him. Even the neighbors around, the people in the nations around Israel, they're accepting David as a king. They're supporting him. Matter of fact, one of the kings, he sent product to build David a palace and helped him build it. So David's sitting good now. He's king over the whole land. The people supporting him. Many of the neighboring nations are supporting him. He's got a palace, fancy place to live. Things is looking good. And that's where we come in chapter 9. I want us to look at the first few verses of that chapter, because I want you to see something that happens next. In verse 1 it says, "And David said, Is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? And there was of the house of Saul a servant, whose name was Ziba. And when they had called him unto David, the king said unto him, Art thou Ziba? And he said, Thy servant is he. And David said, Is there not yet any of the house of Saul, that I may show the kindness of God unto him? And Ziba said unto the king, Jonathan hath yet a son, which is lame on his feet." Now when we look at that, we kind of got to get the setting here. Things is going really good for David. But David had made a promise. Now, to kind of help you to understand this promise, Saul was the guy who was the first king of Israel. David's going to be the second king. While Saul is king, God has David anointed as king. Makes Saul jealous, he chases him, tries to kill him. But in the meantime, one of Saul's sons is named Jonathan. Jonathan and David are very best friends. So even though Saul's trying to kill him, Jonathan's still trying to help David out. But Israel gets in a battle with the Philistines, and in that battle Saul is killed, and Jonathan is killed. But before that happens, if you go back to 1 Samuel chapter 20, you find that David made a promise to his best friend Jonathan. David knew he was going to be the next king. So by that, he knew it was not going to be Jonathan, Saul's son, which was the normal pattern. So he knew that he was going to be king, so he made Jonathan a promise. He said, I will always make sure your family is cared for. Here in chapter 9, David's now king. Saul's dead. Jonathan's dead. But David is intending to keep his promise. Now I know what somebody's already thinking. Well, Saul's dead, and Jonathan's dead. He would know. Who would know? David could go through his life and never have to fulfill that promise. But David knew. And he is intending to keep the promise that he made to Jonathan. And so he called for the servant. And the servant's name was Ziba. We find that in verse 2. And David said, Is there anybody left of the house of Saul that I may show honor to him in the name of God? Is there anybody left that I can keep my promise and take care of them? So from David we see an awesome story of David keeping his promise. He's going to go ahead and take care of Saul's family, of Jonathan's family, just like he promised he was going to. And then you see the response here in verse 3. And Ziba says, Well, yeah, king, Jonathan has a son who's lame at his feet. Now, if David has no idea if there's anybody left, and he calls the servant of Saul and says, hey, I need to know, is there anybody left in the house of Saul so that I can honor them? So that I can keep my promise and take care of them? And his response was, yes, Jonathan has a son. Now, if that were you or I in response to there, I think what we would have done, we would have said, Jonathan has a son and his name is, Jonathan has one son left. You probably don't even know about him. He lives here. But the response was, Jonathan has a son, one son left, and he's lame at his feet. You know what I think Ziba is telling David? I really just kind of, trying to see the story here. I think Ziba is telling David, yeah, Jonathan has a boy, but he's really not worthy of the king to mess with. He's lame at his feet. Now, we have Scripture. So we have all the rest of the story. And I'd encourage you to read the rest of this chapter today. Because what you're going to find is, we're going to find the name of the boy. His name was Mephibosheth. Now, there's going to be a test later. So his name is what? Mephibosheth. There you go. And so when we look at him, we know his name. Mephibosheth. That's what you're going to name your firstborn. Mephibosheth. And so when we think of it, we know that's who he is. We also know how he became lame. Because we have all of Scripture, we know that when the Philistines attacked, and they killed Saul, and they killed Jonathan, everybody knew that the Philistines were coming to take over. And so what they were going to do, they were going to wipe out all Saul's family. So the rest of Saul's family is fleeing, and Mephibosheth is just a young child, and his nurse grabs him, and somehow along the way she's tricked or something, and she's dropped him. And because of that, for the rest of his life, he can't walk. He's lame at his feet. So we know all of this from Scripture. But that, when we look at it, David says, is there anybody left? I have a promise to keep. And I intend to keep that promise. Because we have the rest of the story in chapter 9, we also know how David kept the promise. He says, go to where's he at? Well, he's in a place called Lodabar. So we'll go to Lodabar and get him and bring him back here to my house. Could you imagine being Mephibosheth? David's the enemy. My grandfather tried to kill him for several years of his life. My grandfather chased him all, and now he's going to bring me to the house. Go get him. Go to Lodabar. Well, Lodabar was a detestable place. Bring him back to the palace. And when he did, because we have the rest of the story, we know David said, set him at the king's table. Now, for us, that might be a thing of hospitality. But in David's day, David's saying, make Mephibosheth part of our family. He's going to bring him in, and he's going to honor him in such a way, he's going to let him sit at the king's table and eat. Make him part of the family. He even asks Ziba, and finds out that, hey, there's some land that was theirs. Jonathan had some land that's now Mephibosheth's. So Ziba the servant, he says, you and your sons, you're going to go work that land. You're going to take care of it. You're going to make sure it produces and make sure it brings him in revenue. But as for Mephibosheth, he's always going to eat at the king's table. So David not only kept his promise, he went above and beyond. Now we could look at this, and that's basically the story. And we can say, wow, what a wonderful story from the Old Testament. What a wonderful story from the life of David. I see now why David's considered a man after God's own heart. What a wonderful story of how David kept his promise. Even though he didn't have to. Even though probably even Ziba thought Mephibosheth was unworthy. What a great story. Now we can glean a lot from that story. We can glean a story of what Jesus did for us. And how, even though we're unworthy, He pulled us from an awful place, worse than Lodabar, a place of sin, and placed us in the household of Almighty God. So we can glean a wonderful story there for us spiritually. But we're talking about our relationships. We've all said, I watched some of you even raise your hands to admit that you made promises you hadn't kept. Everybody else was going like this pretty vigorously. We've done that. So how do we learn? How do we in our relationships, how do we keep the promises? How can we be truthful? We can leave here and go, well, David, he was a man. He's a good man. He kept his promise. Good for David. But you know, God wants us to be authentic in our relationships. And in that, I believe God wants us to be truthful. So I want us to look at how can we keep the promises we make to others. Hey, how can you and I keep those promises? I mean, even whether it's the small things, I'll pray for you. I'll call you right back. Now we realize there's things in life that sometimes tend to that. We know that. We can all come up with some kind of story. I blame most of mine on old age. I'm thinking, I just forgot it. But how can we want to honor God in our relationships. And if we're making promises to folks that we're not keeping, we're not honoring God. How can we keep our promises that we make to others? I want us to look at a few things. Number one, I want us to realize what happens spiritually when we make a promise. Listen to that again. Realize what happens spiritually when we make a promise. Do you ever stop to think that when you make a promise to a friend, or you make a promise to somebody, that there's a spiritual aspect to it? And the Bible doesn't say a lot about, when you make a promise to someone else, unless you have a modern translation. But a lot of times what we find it called in Scripture, instead of a promise, we find it called a vow. And when you make a vow to someone, we need to realize what happens spiritually when we make a vow. Or sometimes it's called an oath. When you swear to an oath. And in Scripture, that's not a bad thing. It's making that promise, saying, and it's not, I swear I'll do that. It says that I make a promise. Kind of like the court of law, to hold truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. And so the Bible when it's talking about promise, it might say it's an oath or a vow. But I want you to know, God takes that very seriously. Let me give you an example. This example comes from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 23, verse 21 and 23. We're going to put it on the screen. Deuteronomy 23, 21, starting at verse 21. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, don't avoid keeping it. The Lord your God expects you to keep it. You would be guilty of a sin if you didn't. If you didn't make a vow, you would not be guilty. Make sure you do what you said you would do in your vow. You freely chose to make your vow to the Lord your God. Notice what God says there. When you make a promise, when you make a vow, when you swear to an oath, do your best. God expects you to keep it. So those times we make those promises that we never kept? God expected us to keep that. God's going to hold us to that. He expects us. We make that promise. I think sometimes we can make promises in our own ignorance. But God expects us to keep that. Let me give you a story that happened to me. And I believe with everything in me that God expects me to keep this promise. Years ago when I graduated high school and went to diesel school and graduated there, and I decided it was time to move out on my own. Far as I could from my parents. I went to Nevada. Long way for a West Virginia boy. And I lived there, and I won't go into all the details about that life, but I'll tell you this. It just about tore my mama to pieces. And my mama will tell you, one of the happiest days of her life was that day when I pulled back into the driveway coming home. Mom and Dad done cleaned out the garage, and they give me where you just pull your truck right in and shut the door. That way we got at least a day to spend with you before anybody else knows. It tore my mama to pieces. Mom says, son, would you never do that to me again? And my response to her was, Mom, as long as you live, I will never go west of the Mississippi River to live again. Now, folks, I realize now as an adult, that was a foolish promise. At that time, I didn't know God was going to call me to preach His Word. I didn't know what God had in store for my life. I didn't know that I was limiting what God might have in store by saying, God, I'll do anywhere, but I can't go past here. But I made a promise to my mom. And you know what? I believe, according to Deuteronomy 23, that even though I was ignorant when I made that promise, God's going to expect me to keep that. I've limited what God might want to do in my life. But He's going to expect me to keep that. When we look at our promises, we need to realize that there's a spiritual aspect when we make a promise. God says you shouldn't promise something to another person that you're not going to do your best to deliver. God wants you to be like Him. God is trustworthy. God is truthful. God is careful to fulfill 100% every promise He's ever made. And He expects that from us. So in our relationships with one another, God expects us to be truthful. There's a spiritual aspect to the promises we make. But that's not all. How do we keep, not only just realize the spiritual aspect, but I think the second thing, we need to pay close attention to our words. You know, if we're going to make a promise, we need to pay very close attention to every word that we communicate. Not just speaking, but everything we communicate. We need to watch that. We need to be very cautious of our words. Now, we've already admitted our sins. We've all said we made promises we didn't keep. So let me ask you this. How many of you have ever said things you regretted? Oh yeah, Miss Kathy's about ready to stand up. We've done that, haven't we? I know every one of us could have had our hands up and been waving them like a flag. We've done that. Why? Because we don't pay close attention to our words. You know, I always say my mouth moves faster than my brain. You know, but it's because we don't pay attention. I think how we keep our promises, we pay attention to what we say. You know, words have power, and we know that. Words have the power to help or to harm others. And sometimes those things we say, they just popped out of our mouth before we clearly thought about them. Well, that can tear somebody down real fast. It can hurt. And we didn't really mean it, or we didn't quite mean it that way, but we didn't stop to think about it. You know, one of the wonderful times of the church is when the church has revival services. You know, because, you know, God moves and folks are revived and we feel closer to God. But you know, there's one aspect of revival, and it happens almost every time. This last time we had revival services, it happened. There's one aspect I don't care a lot for, because sometimes we don't pay close attention to our words. One of the first Sunday service we had for revival, service is over, and I'm standing back at the door shaking hands with folks as we left, and one person comes out and shook my hand and says, "Boy, we had a good preacher this time, didn't we? That was a wonderful message." I just smiled and said, "Oh, yes, we did." Inside I'm thinking, what am I, chopped liver? They didn't mean it the way it sounded. I hope. Maybe they did. But you know, sometimes we have to stop and think. Well, we have to pay attention to the words we say. How are they going to be taken? How's the reaction going to be? God tells us we're to pay attention. Because we can build up or we can tear down. Well, Jesus tells us that the promises we make, He's going to hold that against us or hold that to us. Look what it says in Matthew chapter 12, verse 37. This is the last part of that verse. It says, "By your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned." If Jesus is going to judge us partly by our words, don't you think we need to pay close attention to our words? How do we keep the promises that we make? And not only making promises that we're going to keep, pay close attention. So don't speak, don't text, don't email, in no way put out promises that you don't intend to keep. I think one of those things, how to keep them, we pay close attention to our words. Let me give you number 3. Take time for careful consideration before making a promise to someone. Stop and think about it. Don't rush into a promise. Don't, mouth moves faster than brain. We might be in a hurry. But I don't know that I've ever had a situation where I had to make a promise like that. Take a second and think about it. Consider the consequences. Consider what it is to make a promise. Consider what it is we're promising to somebody else. Before you make that vow, before you swear that oath, delay your decision long enough to carefully think through it. Count the cost. In the book of Luke, Jesus tells us, he says, what of you that's going to go out and build a tower is going to go out and just start building without stopping to consider the cost? He said, you're going to take your time and you're going to figure out all the costs so that you'll know if you can complete that tower or not. Now, if he's just talking about building, we know to count the cost or to consider it. But what about the promises we make? Will I be able to keep that? Will I be able to do that? Back when I was 18, I could have jumped that 6-foot sticks. I wasn't about to promise those kids today. Because I knew I couldn't do it. Stop and consider. Can I keep this promise? Before I make it, am I going to be able to keep it? Is it something that I'm going to be able to do? If our promise is done on impulse, we're more likely not to keep that promise. But if our promise is done with consideration, then it's more genuine. We're more apt to keep it. God wants us to be truthful. Our relationships are to be authentic. We need to keep our promises. Number 4, keep it simple when you communicate about your promises. Keep it simple. You know what? We don't need to puff up our promises. Jesus put it really simple. Matthew 5:37. He says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. He's not telling us we need to puff up our promises. You know what, Pastor Dan, I promised such and such that I was going to do this, and I did that. Pastor, I promised you 6 years ago that I was going to do this, and today I fulfilled that promise. Or sometimes we want to puff up our promises. I promised so-and-so that I'd take them to lunch. And I didn't take them to McDonald's, I took them out for a steak dinner. We don't need to puff them up. When we communicate a promise, keep it simple. Jesus said very simply, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Just make the promise if you're going to keep it. Don't puff up about it. Number 5. Make a habit of praying regularly about the promises you've made to other people. Do you ever stop and think about praying to God to help you keep the promises you've made? The God of the universe who knew everything before it ever came out of your mouth, asking Him to help. Lord, help me keep those promises. Help me not to make promises I can't keep. Help me to be truthful in the relationships. Maybe for you and I, we just need to stop and pray. Lord, I want to keep the promises I made. Help me do that. Help me to be a man of my word. Help me to be a lady of integrity. Help me to be truthful in my relationships. Maybe we just need to stop and pray and ask God to help us in those relationships. Here's what I know. We can forgive. We can be loyal. We can be selfless. But if we're making promises in relationships that we're not keeping, we're not honoring God. And maybe this morning, you find that in your relationships, you're not honoring God. It's time to change that. It's time to be authentic, God-honoring in the relationships that we have. So maybe this morning, as we sing our final hymn, you just need to go to God and pray. God, forgive me. Forgive me for making promises I haven't kept. Or maybe God's already reminded you of something you promised someone somewhere. And you need to go and make that right. You need to fulfill that promise. We will honor God. Or maybe today, you just want to pray and say, God, I want to glorify you in all my relationships. Help me do that. Help me be truthful. Help me keep my promises. Maybe today you want to pray to God for a closer walk with Him. Or a deeper relationship. While we sing, maybe you want to come to this altar and kneel there and pray. Then come as we sing. Or maybe today, it's time for you to be obedient in your walk with Him. We've already had part of our service. We want to be baptized. We want to be obedient to Jesus. Maybe He's laid something on your heart and you need to be obedient. I invite you to come as we sing. Maybe for the first time you've realized there's a God who loves you and paid the price for your sin. You will surrender your life to Him and you want the world to know it. Then you come as well. Whatever God wants to do in your life. But I want to ask you this. Are you being authentic in your relationship with Him? Are you genuine? Honoring God? Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Father, I pray for every person here. I pray that they will honor you in their relationship with you. Lord, whatever you want to do in our lives, I pray that we'll say yes. Lord, maybe there's folks here today that they've realized that there's been promises that they've not kept. They need to ask your forgiveness. Or they need to just say yes to you. Maybe they need to go to that person and they need to keep that promise. Or Lord, maybe we just need to ask you to help us. Whatever you want to do in our lives, Lord, I just pray we say yes. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Please stand as we sing page 305. I have decided